Of all of the tools human beings use to make decisions, there is one that is highly effective in capturing the will of large populations of people: democracy. Though the current democratic systems of government are flawed, corrupt, easily swayed by financial incentives, they appear to be the most fertile ground from which we could grow the foundation for a Type 1 planet. The question is, how do we make our democracy truly resilient, unquestionably reliable, and dynamically receptive to the new and innovative ideas on how we can redesign our civilization for centuries to come? Bruce Schneier is a person who has dedicated his life to these questions. He's a public interest technologist, a cryptographer, and a computer security specialist. He's a fellow and lecturer at Harvard's Kennedy School and a board member for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is dedicated to defending digital privacy, free speech, and innovation. In his books, articles, and lectures, Bruce has classified democracy as an information system that faces a crucial dilemma. In order to exist, democracies depend on the free flow of accurate information, empowering their citizens to make informed voting decisions, provide policy input, and hold officials accountable. At the same time, information flows can be manipulated to undermine democracy by allowing unchecked spread of propaganda and pseudo-facts. In the dawn of advanced technology like the internet, automation, machine learning, this manipulation has begun to test the tensile strength of democracy. In order to survive, the model of democracy must evolve. So let's explore how that evolution is possible and what it could look like in the modern technological age. My name is Robert Roach, and this is the Type 1 Planet podcast. Listen or watch this episode on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and visit us at type1planet.net.
Bruce, thank you so much for coming on Type 1 Planet. I really appreciate it. And as you know, we are on virtual, so sometimes we have some technological issues. Just let me know if you're having any audio issues or anything like that.
All right, so far so good. Thanks for having me.
All right, great. So you are a public interest technologist, a cryptographer, a computer security specialist. Your list of articles and books and talks is incredible. So there's so many topics that I want to dive in on with you, but we're going to keep a limited and deep scope here on election security. The mission of our
doing this on election day, so it's strangely relevant.
Perfect. Yes, this is November 8th, 2022. The mission of our organization, Type 1 Planet, we're hoping to find ways to build a foundation for a sustainable, globally stable civilization that can thrive for the next 10,000 years. And the stability and efficacy of democracy is a key element of this model. So today I want to talk to you about a few different concepts. There's the concept of democracy's dilemma. There's, what does it mean for democracy to be an information system? The current reality behind our election technology and what different approaches look like, the good and the bad. And then just on a wider perspective, what is a public interest technologist? How can our democracy work better in a technological age? And finally, we're going to go a little bit into what a movie plot threat is versus real world threats, and outlining what we should be focusing on now to shore up civilizational foundations.
So all right, sounds good. I'm ready.
All right. So let's start with democracy's dilemma. You wrote a great article on this topic. What is the dilemma here?
And this is work with Henry Farrell, who teaches political science at Johns Hopkins University. And what we're looking at is how information flows in democracies versus autocracies. Like governments need information. Governments need information about what's happening in their country, in the world, to make decisions. And sort of what we're learning from social media, from the internet, is that the same systems that allow democracies to collect and share and use information are also pathways for misinformation. And we're sort of contrasting this with an autocracy. Let's sort of take Russia as an example, but it could be any. I think one of Putin's big problems right now is getting accurate information about what's going on in the world. His subordinates, in a lot of ways, I think, don't want to tell him the actual truth because he might not want to hear it and they're going to be blamed. So I think he's being fed misinformation, which comes up from the bottom because the accurate information is bad news. And no one wants to tell your boss bad news. And in an autocracy, that's actually really hard. It's very hard for him to get good information. And also, he can use the technologies of information flows, I mean, websites, the press, social media, to control information, to limit the ability of people to organize, to limit the ability of the populace to know reality, right? To feed a rosy view of the world. And this is sort of what an autocracy does. In a democracy, you don't have that ability to control, right? You don't want it. You want a free press. You want an open press. And those same mechanisms that we use and need to solve problems, right? Today's election day. It is effectively a collective problem-solving algorithm, right? Push aside the noise and the problems we have. When you think about an election, the goal of it is to aggregate all of our preferences and then determine who has a majority, who has a plurality, who becomes the leader and leaders. Right? That is a really complicated information system. So those same systems that we use to move information around can be used by outsiders, by propagandists, to push disinformation. And we learned, just a few days ago that Russian disinformation campaigns are up in the United States. They're also up because Twitter fired half its moderators. For whatever reasons, it is a fruitful avenue to manipulate opinion in the United States, in democracies, in a way that us doing it to Russia doesn't have that effect because they don't have those free information flows. So the dilemma basically is we need information flows. We need the free press. We need open social media. We need these conversations. Yet at the same time, they make us uniquely vulnerable. Right? This is hard. I mean, all of the conversations around social media and misinformation are hard. These are not easy things to solve. But that's really what we talked about in that paper.
So I think one of the biggest issues that I see when we talk about this model is legitimacy and efficacy of democracy as a system. And there's this kind of like larger conversation about what is truth. And one distinction that you make is common political knowledge versus contested political knowledge, and the sharp divides between them, and then the blurring of the lines between those kinds of knowledge. Can you explain that in relation to what you were just talking about?
So common political knowledge are the things we all share. Like who is president is common political knowledge. There's no debate about that. Contested political knowledge are things we don't share. Like, is the current tax rate good or bad? What should the tax rates be? So there's things that are sort of beyond conversation. How does the legal system work? Right? How does Congress work? The mechanisms are a common political knowledge. We all agree on that. And we disagree on matters of policy. Now, the problem comes when things that are common become contested. When who is the legitimate president is no longer something we all share. With, what are the mechanisms of voting are things we no longer share. And what we're seeing today, really because of propaganda, is common political knowledge being pushed into contested political knowledge. And that's actually very dangerous. Because for democracy to work, we all need to agree on how it works. And if we don't agree on how it works, then it's failing. And that's something we took for granted. And it's sort of interesting that elections serve two purposes, and they're very different. The first one is the obvious one, is to pick the winner. The second, and also important, is to convince the loser that they lost. And to the extent that the election fails in the second, it's not a well-working system. And I think
Now,
Trump misses this. I mean, in the old days before elections, the way you lost power is somebody shot you, right? You were executed. Elections allow someone to leave power peacefully. And that's a really important consideration, which you kind of don't think about anymore.
now, there's a lot of people out there who would say this system is really old. It's got a great foundation, but it needs to evolve. So, at what point does people contesting political knowledge become a healthy part of evolution, especially in the face of technological evolution in a
I
civilization?
think you're making a really important point that's both interesting and extremely fraught. So I'm actually thinking about this. How do we reimagine democracy? And what you said is really critical. The modern constitutional democracy is the best form of government that mid 18th century technology could invent, right? Because travel and communications are hard. We need to pick one of us from our local area to go all the way over there and pass laws in our name. And we had to do that. We couldn't do anything else. And now that travel, communications, organization, all these things are easy, is there a better way to do it? I think it's a really important discussion. I'm actually thinking about this. I'm having a convening on this in December. I'm writing about this. Very separate question is how do we get from here to there? Because I can say, right now we vote for people for offices ranging from 2 years to 6 years. Is that a good idea? Maybe it should be 10 years. Maybe it should be 10 minutes. We can do either. I mean, right now, we organize representative districts by geography. This is the only way that made sense. We could do it now by age. Right? All the 36-year-olds, that's your representative in Congress. We could do it randomly. Everybody born on March 17th, here's your representative in Congress. We could do it by affinity. You can decide, I want this person to represent me, and their power is proportional to the number of people. I mean, I'm just making stuff up here. They are all possible with current technology, but they are not possible with the current politics and the path that we might want to change our system, right? We can't even do things like abolish the electoral college or the filibuster. I mean, minor things that we might want to do. So what is a good way of organizing democracy in the future is very separate from what's the path and how can we get from here to there.
And our system seems so congested now. And you've talked about having healthy kind of, or negative, I think, but healthy feedback loops to bring democracy back to a dynamic equilibrium. So is our congestion in Congress, for example, what's preventing this?
I mean, it's several things. It's entrenched power. For every rule that we think is dumb, someone's benefiting from it, and they are pushing to keep it. And in the United States, especially, more than so than in many other countries, I think all other countries, money rules politics. I mean, a bunch of reasons for this, but it does. More than Japan or Australia or France or the UK or India. I mean, any other democracies, money rules politics in the United States, which is why that policy changes the wealthy want are much more likely to get enacted than policy changes the wealthy don't. Our actual democracy is kind of only just barely sort of works.
I've always described democracy in America as a game in which the rules are created by the people who are already winning.
And that's right. But that's, that makes sense. So, what started this is your question of how do you make a big move? Do you need a revolution? When do the stresses of the existing system get so great that it simply breaks? Now, historically, we don't make major political changes in human society without revolution, without violence. Can we avoid that this time? I'd like to think so, but odds aren't on our side. Now, this is not an optimistic thing I'm saying, but you're right, there comes a point where the system just breaks. And we might be reaching that. Technology matters a lot here, right? The technologies of control today are far less human-based than they used to be. like previous centuries, it took people to keep society in check, to prevent a revolution. Or even most recently, you think of like Romania. The Romanian government fell basically when Ceausescu's personal guards looked around and said, I'm not defending you anymore. I'm with that mob. Right? And then it was over. But if you could replace the humans with technology, you can survive with a smaller and smaller cohort that is keeping you propped up. And it's an open question today of how that would go.
You need to have less consensus from the mob, if you have your technology
and
backing
that's
you.
sort of when democracy was formed. I mean, this is coming out of European history, when the people in charge realize that they can't just ignore the peasants. They need to give them some power and some freedom, because that legitimizes the government, because they're moving to an age when armies had to be larger, that it wasn't just your nobility that were the knights serving in your army and that was enough. They're the only people you had to make happy. When you need large standing armies, you're talking about Napoleon in that era, suddenly you had to make a much bigger cohort of people relatively happy. And that really changed how government had to function.
Interesting. So we're talking about the tip of culture, where the frothy human element of how our culture works. But underneath that, where there's this technology, there is the tools that we use as a civilization to make decisions. And that comes down to ballots. That comes down to the way that our computers work. That comes down to the reason, the Internet of Things, all the stuff I'm surrounded with right now are somehow connected to the internet. And so let's talk about election technology. There's many forms of it. You've referenced the efficacy of 100% paper technology, the secret ballot, the 100% electronic method, the hybrid models. What are the big models that stand out in your mind, and what doesn't work and what does work from your
So
perspective?
it does work at the gold standard for voting. I live in Massachusetts. It's the way we vote. Used to live in Minnesota. That's the way we voted there. Are optical scan ballots. Right? I get a paper ballot that I can read. There are ovals. I fill them in. That I can look at it. It is my ballot. I see it is correct. I feed it into a machine. Actually, this year I mailed it in. In Minnesota, I used to like to go to vote in person. I would take it. I would feed it into an optical scan reader. That reader would tally my ballot automatically, and the paper would fall basically into a locked box. So that gives me the benefit of a quick tally, right? No manual counting, but I have that paper ballot in case I need to do a manual recount. And that is what works. What we in voting say, the word we use, this is the important phrase, voter verifiable paper ballots. That's what the system has to provide. Not an audit receipt, but a ballot, a voter verifiable ballot. What doesn't work is touchscreen voting, voting by internet, anything that doesn't have paper. And this is a little subtle to explain. The basic problem is that I can never guarantee the security of the computers we're voting on. So yeah, I could vote on this iPhone, but I don't know if my iPhone's been hacked, which means I never know if what I see on the screen is what's happening in the computer. Now, this is the same thing for everything. And there are hacks against banking, right? Bank by internet that take advantage of it. The difference is, and the reason we can still bank via the internet, even though we should never vote via the internet, is banking is auditable. If there's a problem, if there's fraud, the bank has a complete audit record of what happened. In voting, because of the secret ballot, you can't have that audit record. Right? We need to break the link between the voter and the vote. In a way, we don't between the bank account holder and the transaction. You make a transaction, we know who it is, we know your name, who it was sent to, we know all the details, we can unravel it if there's a problem. I can't do that with voting.
Now,
so that, okay. And that's the problem. If we gave up on a secret ballot, which we could decide as society, voting by internet's easy, right? It becomes trivial. You vote on the internet, And then after election day, you go to the tally website, you look for your name, you look for your vote, you know it was good.
Now,
So ballot secrecy, which is a value that we value, but we might exchange for convenience in the same way we have exchanged the voting booth for convenience.
I'm sure you've heard this typical reaction to how banking has the verifiable chain of events is, well, we have this with blockchain. We have it with cryptocurrency.
Blockchain is a disaster. Blockchain makes voting worse. Do not do it.
So let's talk about that. So why does blockchain
actually solve the problem? If you look at the threats against voting systems, blockchain doesn't solve any of them. It's complicated, but I guess you have to trust me on that. Also, blockchain removes software independence, giving you another enormous vulnerability. And plus it's blockchain, which gives you all the vulnerabilities of untrusted, not decentralized, all the things that blockchain pretends to do and doesn't. It actually doesn't solve any voting problems and makes existing ones much worse.
Okay.
So, no.
So for now, nothing has changed since 2019. You made the exact same point. And so you haven't seen any of evolution in the industry since then.
And there can't be, because fundamentally it doesn't solve the problems. And it's worth thinking about the notion of a secret ballot. So let's talk about the ballot box, the voting booth. The reason that exists is to stop vote buying. Right? So I can give you money to vote the way I want, but when you walk into the voting booth alone, I have no idea if you delivered the goods. Right? And you can't prove it. So effectively, I can't buy your vote. But with a vote by mail, I give you $10, you give me your ballot. Right? Just give me a signed blank ballot. Here's $10. I can buy your vote. And that is why we have these voting booths. But we as society have basically decided that that's not a real threat. That if somebody did that at scale, we would find out. It'd become public. And the fact that nobody does that, I think is telling. Right? Nobody sets up a kiosk on the street corner and says, right, your ballot for $10 and a shot of whiskey. So we have decided that we're going to give up on that bit of security because vote by mail increases turnout. And that we're okay with someone in the household saying to everyone else in the household, just give me all your ballots, I'll vote for you, don't worry about it. Now, that's probably gendered, right? The man does that to the woman. But we've decided that's not a real threat. It's not a threat worth worrying about. And vote by mail gives us enormous benefits and turnout. It's an interesting trade-off we made. We could make that with secrecy. We can say, look, most people's politics are public. They wear it on their sleeve. The secret ballot thing doesn't really buy us anything. And if we got rid of that, like you could vote by app and it would be super easy and suddenly voter turnout goes up to 90%. It would be great.
Would you advocate for getting rid of the secret ballot measures?
I don't know. It's an interesting question that's sort of beyond my expertise. It's not a technology question. It's a societal values question.
All right, so we got to get you together.
There are cantons in Switzerland that still vote openly in a town square. There is no secret ballot there. That's the only place I know of that doesn't have a secret ballot. Most representatives do not work with secret ballots. Right? When Congress votes, we all know how they vote. And we want that for transparency. Right? I elected you. I should know if you are working in the manner you claimed you would be. So we usually demand open ballots when it's representatives. And we want secret ballots when it's us. That has value. Is that value greater or less than the turnout increase if we were to do away with it and make voting super trivially easy? I don't know. It's a really important question that I think we as society should start thinking about.
So there's alternatives. There's possibly a better way of doing this. There's room for improvement with election technology. Now the question is, how do we start the conversation and have it in a healthy way in our current democratic system. And you talk about public interest technologists frequently in this respect. And so please tell us, what is a public interest technologist and why are they important?
Public interest technologists are people who work at the intersection of technology and policy. So if you think about this conversation, we're having a policy conversation, but it's deeply imbued with technological knowledge. And if you get the tech wrong, you're going to get the policy wrong. I mean, the same way 2000 Help America Vote Act, everyone bought touchscreen machines, which are a security disaster. Now, we didn't want that. It was a bad policy decision because the technologists weren't involved. And pretty much all the policy debates of our century have strong technological components. We're talking about democracy and how it works, but we could be talking about climate change. We could be talking about AI and the future of work. We could be talking about so many issues. And we need people who speak both tech and policy. So I, right now, am at the Harvard Kennedy School. I'm teaching cybersecurity policy to non-scientists, to public policies, grad students. And that is part of this. We need technologists on congressional staffs so that when Mark Zuckerberg appears before Congress to testimony, they don't ask him dumb questions like, how does Facebook make money?
Yeah.
So that we need people who understand these issues, who can advise legislators, who can advise NGOs, the press, civil society organizations, companies, that a lot of important issues straddle tech and policy. And that's what I call public interest tech. I think it's vitally important. And whether you approach it like I do, as technologists first moving into policy, or the other way, policy person first moving into tech, those are basically my students. There's room for everybody in all of these places, but they're sorely needed. Or just like bad policy happens to us, I don't know, right now Congress is debating app stores, and should Apple and Google have monopolies on app stores? That's a policy question with very deep technological issues. And you must understand the tech or you will get that policy wrong. And that's just one example out of hundreds.
It's been so interesting seeing from both sides the realization that technology isn't neutral to culture. And there's been that slow evolution from the Silicon Valley side where they're like, we're just making cool stuff. Everyone loves this. And then from the governmental side, the realizing the importance of technology in our government and in our culture and in the way that we work as a civilization, that they're slowly converging, and we're seeing a lot of sparks when that convergence happens.
Because it happened via the back door. I mean, the internet's invented in the 70s, and it's like never used for anything important ever, and limited access to people with legitimate research interest. So it sort of showed up without any government intervention at all. Government funded it. It was a government project. But how it worked, nobody cared. It didn't matter. And so many of these things, even when electronic commerce starts in the 90s, it didn't matter very much. So technologists were allowed to build the world as they saw fit. I mean, their work ended at the keyboard and screen, and who cares? Now, this decade, the previous decade, suddenly it matters greatly for democracy, for our economy, for national security, for personal expression. It's critical to society. And it kind of happened, as companies saw fit. I mean, we built the internet to serve the near-term financial interests of a bunch of Silicon Valley white guys, which is a terrible way to build society. But we didn't realize it was so critical. Now it matters. Now how Facebook moderates affects democracy. Mm-hmm. We're watching Twitter immolate in kind of slow motion, kind of fast slow motion, and it actually affects the substrate of society. And we didn't expect that. Now when you build an app, you build a website, you build an internet company, you're building the world. So we really need humanities people, social scientists, public interest tech, imbued at all levels in this process. You can't just do what you want anymore because it's too critical.
Hmm. Now, I'm conscious of time. I know that we're going to try to keep it to half an hour-ish. I wanted to talk a little bit about movie plot threats, but it's actually not that important in respect to what we're talking about here, because just real quick, you've referenced movie plot threats as the things that people, the AI apocalypse, the destruction of all mankind because we, plug ourselves into Twitter and never come out of, we go into the matrix. And, these are threats that we love to talk about, but they're not really, you're talking about, let's make this boring again. We want this to be a part of society that's very understandable and very easy to be a part of. Is that right?
I coined this phrase right after September 11th, the terrorist attacks, because it was something that I saw, that we were fearful about oddly specific threats. I don't know if you remember, terrorists with scuba gear, terrorists with almanacs, terrorists blowing up bridges, which is like really hard to do. And it really is that because we are a species of storytellers, because we think in terms of story, that we respond to these oddly specific threats that really come out of the movies, right? You expect Bruce Willis to run in to save the day. I guess he's too old to save the day. Whoever saves the day these days in movies, I don't even know anymore. And we tend to not see the larger picture because we are so focused on the specifics. Mm-hmm. And that is a very natural human cognitive bias, because we do respond to stories. And you think, right? Halloween was a week ago, and the weird stories of poisons and Halloween candy, which never happens. It is complete myth, but it is a very scary story. And I'm sure there was a movie based on it somewhere.
Right.
But if you want the ultimate movie plot threat, whenever someone asks me, what's the worst that can happen, it really is a comet hits the Earth during the zombie apocalypse. That's the worst that can happen.
Well, I know NASA's working on the first one with their DART mission to divert comets. So now we just
which is kind of neat. Like we can move. We as humans can move objects in the solar system. That is pretty damn awesome.
And such a small amount of human beings made that happen. Imagine if we were able to come to consensus.
But it's more than you think, right? Because there's millions of human beings that support the work of the few that did the work. Be careful. This is a common mistake. We think that we did it ourselves. We think that a small group did it. If without the millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions that make society work, the few that do the actual job couldn't actually do it. You think of all the people necessary to make us have this conversation, it's enormous. Right? It's people who do everything to get power, to everything to get telephony to work, everything to get food production. Because if we were growing our own food, we couldn't have this conversation. It takes an enormous civilization to make this conversation work. It's not just the two of us. And I wish more people realize that. We are literally all in this together.
So let's talk about keeping that enormous conversation going. What are I'm interested in having this conversation from every angle, bringing you back on maybe in a panel. Maybe we can talk to someone who answers that societal value question that you said that you weren't able to answer. I would love to see you talk with those. But who else should I be talking to? What are some public interest technology organizations or individuals that are doing amazing work from your perspective?
So if you want to talk about voting, Verified Voting is a great organization. Thinking about the internet and freedom and how the internet, can serve humanity, a bunch of organizations. EFF has been doing this for many years. I'm on the board of EFF.
You're on the board, yep.
And Access Now, I'm also on the board there. They do this much more internationally. Electronic Privacy Information Center, Fight for the Future. These are all great organizations that are doing very important work at the intersection of technology and public policy.
Bruce, I cannot thank you enough. This has been, I think I could sit here and talk to you for 5 hours, so I'm going to save you that.
I think your audience would get bored, even though we would want to break it up. But
that's true.
I'll come back. We can do this again.
I can't wait. Thank you so much. And please let the audience know how they can follow you, reach you, stay checked in on your work.
So I'm easy. Everything I do is on Schneier.com, which the spelling of which will appear on whatever screen you're watching this. I won't even try. I'm not on Facebook. I don't tweet. I mean, I don't do social media, which makes me a freak, but highly productive. But my blog is mirrored on Facebook and on Twitter, so there are ways to find me there. But basically, all my essays, my writings, my books, everything's on Schneier.com. I'm super old school. I was blogging way back before it was cool, then it became cool, then it became not cool, now it's kind of cool again. I have an email newsletter I've had since the late 90s, which I think has gone in and out of two cool, not cool cycles. I think email newsletters are cool again, but on Substack, which I'm not. So I'm around.
I spent hours on Schneier.com over the last couple of weeks, and I've enjoyed every second.
And we don't track
I highly recommend it. Well, Bruce, thank you again so much. I really appreciate it. And
thanks for
talk
having
to you
me.
soon. Awesome.